Hey there! Welcome to part 3 of Lrn2Tank, where I will discuss the stats and gear that you're going to be interested in as a feral tank. Additionally, I hope to shed some light on that stamina versus agility debate while offering the most unbiased opinions and explanations I can, while also correcting some common misconceptions. As a person, it's nigh impossible to be completely unbiased, but I'm trying my hardest, so please bear with me. With all of the flame wars about this subject, you might want to invest in some fire resist gear before we get started. First, let's start with stats. The current, as of patch 4.1, stat priority for bears looks something like this. Agility is our strongest stat, next is dodge. After that is armor, mastery, crit, expertise below the soft cap of 26, strength, hit. Those are followed by expertise above the soft cap, and then bonus armor. Haste, of course, is stuck at the end of the list because he was a jerk and he stole my cupcake. Wait, so where is stamina in all of this? Well, okay, the short answer is it depends. I'll get to the long, convoluted answer, I promise, but first let's explain what each of the above stats gives us. Agility is a major stat for bears, increasing our attack power, crit chance, and dodge chance. Okay, so dodge sounds defensive. What about those other two damage things? How do they help us survive? Well, in addition to extra rage generation and potential self-healing from our talents every time we critically hit a mob, we also have a chance of gaining a savage defense bubble that absorbs damage from the next physical attack we receive. The more often we crit, the more often we can gain those bear bubbles. The size of our bear bubble is related to how much attack power we have. The more attack power, the bigger the bubble. Thus, agility is extremely strong for bears as not only an offensive stat, but also for defense. Now, dodge rating increases our chance to, well, dodge. We don't block, okay? Technically, bear bubbles sort of count as a block, but I digress. And we definitely don't parry, so we'll have to focus on what we do best, dodge. Completely ignoring an incoming swing is that much less damage you take. Dodge also increases the effectiveness of our bear bubbles. You see, the more that we dodge, the more often we're going to have a bear bubble up for the next hit that we don't dodge. Leather gear does not come with dodge on it by default, so you'll be spending a lot of time reforging your weakest stat on each piece of gear to it. There are necklaces, rings, cloaks, and trinkets with dodge on them, but most of them are accompanied by strength, so they may not actually be so great compared to other options. Always compare all of the stats before deciding. Keep in mind that dodge is subject to diminishing returns. The more dodge rating you have, the more you need to get that next percentage point. Or more simply, it's going to take you more dodge rating to get from 30 to 31% than it did to get from 29 to 30%. There are two types of armor in the game. There's the normal, plain, boring armor that we see on the majority of our gear, especially leather and cloaks. And then there's this bonus armor stuff that sometimes crops up on necklaces, rings, trinkets, and enchants. While both of these reduce the amount of physical damage we take, that normal armor stuff gets a huge buff when we switch into bear form, while that bonus armor that comes on all of those accessories doesn't. So they're on two different ends of the priority system, and generally the easiest way to tell how much is bonus armor, or if it's bonus armor, is if either the text is in green, or if when you mouse over the armor description in your character sheet, it has that value in, glowing green as well. Mastery increases the strength of our bear bubbles by 1% for every quarter of a mastery point we have. Each boss in the current content deals physical damage of some sort, usually a lot of it. So we're going to want to reduce the damage from their swing so that we don't take as much damage as possible. More critical strike rating means more chances of proccing our bear bubbles. Additionally, it allows us to generate more threat, and if you have the proper talents for it, you can gain extra rage for every time you crit, as well as provide yourself with some self-healing. Just like players, though, bad guys have defenses as well. They can dodge, they can parry, and they can block. Expertise in hit increases the chances that our attacks actually will connect. So if we miss an attack, we just missed out on a bear bubble opportunity as well as some extra threat. Until you reach that soft cap of 26, expertise rating is almost twice as effective as hit rating, reducing the chance of both parries and dodges versus, just the plain boring misses that hit rating reduces. After dodges are removed from the hit table, hit is marginally better than expertise because it affects fairy fire, our only actual spell, in addition to our physical abilities. That said, we generally do not gear for expertise or hit at any point for rating. Threat off the pool is handled by blowing berserk and enrage abilities coupled with misdirections from your hunters and tricks of the trade from your rogues. And threat through the fight is generally handled with vengeance stacks. As far as the bear bubbles are concerned in rating, we crit often enough that when we do hit, that any misses, dodge, or parries in between are compensated because we have a pretty good bear bubble uptime in general. That said, if your focus is on tanking dungeons, you will likely find these two threat stats to be much higher up in the priority list, simply because your party members are not necessarily going to follow your kill order. So Strength, before patch 4.2, provided 2 points of attack power for each point of Strength. This increases your savage defense bubbles and your threat, but, point for point, agility is much better than Strength. Now, as of patch 4.2, we're only going to get 1 attack power for each point of Strength, so it's going to actually make its way further down the priority list. So if you see Strength drop, even if it's got dodge on it, you might want to leave that for your friendly warrior, DK, or paladin. Haste is sitting at the end of the list, not only because it stole my cupcake, but because it really is just a crummy stat for bears. Okay, sure, it increases our white swing damage, which means more potential attacks and thus more potential criticals and all that good stuff we love so much. However, it's so much weaker than the other stats that it's really not worth taking. Avoid it like the plague, and when you do have it, be sure that it's the first thing you reforge to your dodge. Okay, alright, I promised. Stamina. Oh boy, stamina. Well, aside from trinkets, stamina is available on every piece of gear in the game. Each point of stamina provides us with more of that green bar called health, as well as potential attack power from our vengeance ability. Basically, the more stamina you have, the more damage you can take before dying. So where do we put it in the priority order? Okay, well first, let me tell you a little story. So once upon a time, tanks used to keep different gear sets for different fights. They'd have a stamina set, a mitigation set, an avoidance set, even those resistance sets you may have heard of. They had tons of gear sets. Bags were full. And then Icecrown Citadel released at the end of Wrath of the Lich King. The bosses in there hit extremely hard, but healers weren't limited by their mana pools. So aside from a few tanks who brought out their frost resist sets for heroics and Dragosa attempts, every tank on the planet stacked stamina. So then Deathwing gets the serious case of acid reflux and starts spitting fire everywhere. The healers were left so frazzled that their heals were not as strong as once they were, and they started running out of their mana resources pretty quickly. The tanks, however, because they had all of that stamina, were left relatively unscathed by the hellfire and brimstone that rained upon them, so they kept doing what they were doing. The healers, of course, just couldn't handle it. The damage was not so bad, but the health pools, they just couldn't keep people topped off. And as the damage started increasing over time, especially as you got into dungeons, then heroic dungeons, and then even raids, the amount of damage that wasn't being avoided just was draining their resources way too quickly. Rather than having multiple sets of gears, tanks, who had kind of become lazy and complacent in ICC, wanted this one-size-fits-all style of gearing. So discussions started regarding the value of stamina and other avoidance-based stats, such as agility and dodge. I wish I could say that there was a happily ever after, but the truth of the matter is that the changes to the way tanks and healers interacted has actually fragmented most individuals into separate schools of thought. So the first school argues that stamina is still the best stat. Their reasoning is that dodge and bear bubbles are subject to RNG. You can't control when you get hit or how often, so stamina is a safe default. They also claim that stamina is the only stat that's useful against magic damage fights. Now, the second school argues that agility is now the best stat. Their reasoning is that avoiding as much damage as possible is better for yourself and the healers who aren't having to sink as much mana into you. They focus on ways of actually reducing incoming magic damage, such as through Perseverance and the Mirror of Broken Images trinket, as well as using their cooldowns. So these two schools are extremes. In general, most people fall somewhere in between them. So as a new bear tank, how do you decide what your gems and enchants should look like? Well, first let's handle a few things that get pointed out all of the time in these debates. First one is that Sejta stacks stamina. You don't know who Sejta is? Okay, you've heard of Paragon, right? No? Okay, well, Sejta is the bear tank for Paragon. Paragon, of course, is the highest ranking guild in the entire world. So many bears the world over look up to him for good reason. So if the best bear in the world is stacking stamina, it's gotta be the best stat, right? Wait just a second. Before you start investing in those solid ocean sapphires, there are two things that you should really think about. The first is that, as the best guild in the world, Paragon also has some of the best players in the world. Their raid members don't stand in bad stuff, their healers don't overheal, and they basically just don't screw up. Well, at least not much. When you can play with such perfection, you don't need to worry about what you're gearing. Sejta could probably take an all restoration gear, and it probably wouldn't make a difference. Okay, well, it might make a little bit of a difference, but I bet he could do it. Unless you're the next Sejta and your guild is hot on Paragon's tail, you will screw up, your raid members will stand in fire, and your healers will be before the end of the fight. So the second thing to keep in mind is that those who push world first content don't really have time to gear up beforehand or to theory craft. Those of us who start raiding will generally be in a mixture of 346s, 353s, and even some of those 359s. We have plenty of stamina from our gear for tier 11 normal mode content. Paragon, however, went in with some crafted gear, a lot of quest rewards, and a couple of dungeon pieces. So naturally, their tanks had a lot less base health, so they needed to bring that up in order to survive. They didn't have time to crunch all the numbers to see just how much health they needed for each fight. Stamina was just the easiest thing to fall back to. Well, now that they're in the best gear available, it really doesn't matter what they stack. I mean, he could put intellect in every single gem slot and he'd be just fine. So the second thing to keep in mind is that Reese stacks agility. So who's Reese? Well, she's not in Paragon, but she is the bear tank for an extremely high-ranking guild called Drow. She's the author of the Inconspicuous Bear blog, which contains the most up-to-date bear tanking information. She also happens to be the most vocal proponent of agility over stamina. She's cleared just as much content with Drow as Paragon has, and she's actually gone through all the trouble of explaining why she does it and how she does it. So the thing to take away from these 2 points is that high-ranking bears have used both methods and everything in between in order to clear all current content. The third thing I'd like to point out is this whole idea that because you can't dodge magic damage, you should stack stamina. Now, this is actually a logical fallacy that really grates on my nerves. Yes, it's true that you can't dodge magic damage. Well, at least not most of the time. Although, arguably, a lot of the magic damage in current boss fights can be avoided by simply moving or making sure that your interrupters are doing their job. No, our bear bubbles don't reduce magic damage taken, only physical. But here's my question. How exactly does stamina reduce the amount of damage you take from magic damage? Well, the answer is it doesn't. In fact, for some fights, the magic damage is actually attached to a boss's melee swing. So if you dodge that swing, then you just dodge the magic damage. Cho'Gall is a very good instance of this. Also, there are no fights in the current content where magic damage is more than half of what is being taken by a tank. So ignoring all of the other damage that you're taking is really not a great idea. As far as stamina is concerned, taking 20k damage from a fireball is really no different than taking 20k damage from a melee swing to the face. So if you claim that you stack stamina simply because of magic damage, you really don't have any ground to stand on. If you're facing a fight with a significant amount of magic damage overall, such as Nefarian, or that has a large amount of burst magic damage, such as Heroic Maloriac, and you're concerned about effectively reducing your magic damage, you should be arming yourself with things like prismatic elixirs, the Mirror Broken Images trinket, and an Effulgent Shadow Spirit diamond in your helm. So where does stamina come into play in all this? Well, you do need enough health to survive the fight. No more and no less. Too much health means you're gimping your ability to avoid damage that is avoidable, and you're causing your healers to waste mana on you. Not enough health is usually pretty obvious because you're, well, dead. So how much health is just enough? Well, there's no one answer to that question, I'm afraid. If you're appropriately geared for a dungeon or a raid, in general the stamina that you get by default from your armor and buffs is plenty. If, however, you're undergeared for the content you're currently running, you're probably going to want more stamina. If your healers are lagging a lot or have ADD and don't pay attention to your health bar, well, you probably want new healers, but assuming that's not an option, you might be interested in adding some more stamina to your gear. More generally, my suggestion is that if you're frequently dying because your healers have run out of mana, you should switch out some of your stamina for agility. If you are frequently dying because your healers can't heal you quickly enough, and the amount by which you died is only a few thousand health or less, you should switch out some agility for stamina. If, however, your overkill is far more than that, no amount of stamina is going to save you, and you should really sit down and talk with your healers about the timings of your personal cooldowns as well as their external ones, such as Guardian Spirit. Communicating with your healers is extremely important as a tank. Keep in mind that certain fights like to throw curveballs, and you should be aware of them. For example, Heroic Chimeron can hit the feud tank for upwards of 250k damage a swing, even if they've done everything right. A double attack hitting both times during feud is pretty much a death sentence no matter how much health you have. Dodging can help, but is a bit like Russian roulette and should not be relied upon in this instance. Instead, you should be using personal cooldowns, such as survival instincts, and healers should be giving you an external cooldown as well if yours won't last long enough. In a similar vein, if you're eating the dark phase damage on Heroic Maloriac, you need to make sure that you have enough health to survive that black crap of doom, to make sure you're not standing in puddles, and also to let your healers know a few seconds before the healing window is open so that they can start queuing their spells to top you off. I definitely find my Prismatic Elixirs, Mirror Trinket, and Effulgent Metagem indispensable for that fight. Okay, phew, we're finally done with stats. Now let's talk about actually gearing up. First and foremost, you want Agility Leather. Leave the cloth and the caster leather to your friendly healers and DPS. When it comes to your gear, generally the higher the item level, the stronger the item, simply because it means we're getting more armor, agility, and stamina. Now, two items of the same item level, however, will have equal amounts of those stats, so we'll need to look at what else they offer. Let's take these two pair of eye level 359 shoulders, for example. This pair has Mastery and Critical Strike for secondary stats, both of which are extremely strong and pretty high up on the priority list. This pair here has Critical Strike on it, but it also has Haste. Haste is completely and utterly terrible, so that first pair is definitely much better. Now, sometimes it's harder to tell which item is actually better, especially when you start putting reforges into the mix. There are two ways to go about making an informed decision. The first is to use Rawr. Rawr is an optimization program that allows you to compare gear, talents, consumables, buffs, you name it, it can do it. The bare module for Rawr is pretty good, but not everything is in perfect shape. For example, the fine folks over at Tangedyn have determined that the Windwalk enchant has a 1.0 proc per minute rate, but Rawr still has it as 1.4, which means that it's more heavily favored than it should be. Rawr also requires some advanced setting up and is not fully fleshed out for every fight. The second option is Tangedyn's Bear Mitigation Spreadsheet. Tangedyn Spreadsheet allows you to enter your current stats into the spreadsheet and it will spit out their equivalent weights compared to agility. For those of you who wish to focus more on stamina, there's even a time to live line there just for you. Now, the problem with this ability is that using these weights to evaluate a new piece of gear is only approximate. It's actually a better idea to figure out exactly how your stats are going to change with the new piece, put all of that into the spreadsheet, and compare it with the old ones. This method can be extremely time consuming. Now, whichever method you use, just know that there are tools out there that will help answer such questions as, Is mastery hit on this item better than the crit and expertise on this one? And things such as, well, is that higher item level cloak with strength, dodge, and mastery better than this cloak that I currently have that has agility, mastery, and crit with some of that crit reforged to dodge? Trinkets. It's good to have a large assortment of them. Do you need more health for one boss? Well, equip two with a bunch of stamina on them and you're good to go. Do you need lots of protection against magic damage? Well, grab that Mirror of Broken Images from Baradin's Wardens, or, whatever the Horde equivalent is. I think it's Hellscream something, maybe? And you're good to go. Are you just fighting farm content? Well, then go double agility all the way. Extra damage? You're great. Kill that boss, 3 seconds faster. Trinkets are the easiest items to swap around based on what is needed for a given fight. I personally run with one stamina trinket and one agility trinket the majority of the time, but you should play around with your trinkets to determine what works best for you. Weapons are actually kind of simple. You want the biggest, beefiest two-hander you can find with agility on it. Leave that strength stuff to the DKs, warriors, and paladins. Generally, your item of choice is going to be either a staff or a polearm, and you need to expect to fight hunters for them. Okay, so what about that tier 11 stuff? Well, the legs are awesome, flat out. Crit mastery, yeah, they're great. And they're easily obtained from the VP or JP in the next patch vendor. The other 4 pieces are all pretty meh stat-wise. The 2-piece bonus gives a 10% bonus to our last rate damage, and last rate is a very small part of our total damage, usually less than 10%. So, the 2-piece bonus is kind of crap. Now, the 4-tier piece bonus is actually pretty useful. It increases the time of your survival instinct ability by 6 seconds. Now, for dungeons, normal raids, and actually a lot of the heroic raid bosses, the bonus is really not quite as good as all those stats that you use by utilizing your tier set. However, this bonus can be crucial for certain fights, specifically heroic raid bosses like Chimeron. If you are planning on doing heroic mode bosses, you are going to want to come up with your 4 tier 11 set. And if you are using your tier 11 set, the best piece to not use out of it is going to be the gloves. Instead, you're going to want to pick up, the set of crit mastery gloves that are available off the bosses. And of course, it figures that the tier gloves would be the cheapest item to buy. Sorry. Enchants should be determined the same way that your gear is. There are a few places where you have some options, but generally, they're pretty cut and dry. And those places where you do have options, they're usually between something that's more stamina focused or something that's more agility focused. Be sure to do your research and find out what works best for you. Of special mention are boot and weapon enchants. For 99.9 repeating decimal percent of the fights, you're going to want a run speed enchant. End of story. They don't make the choice for us very easy, as there are stamina, agility, and mastery options for our run speed enchants, though you're probably going to want to stick with one of the prior 2. For your weapon, Mighty Agility is extremely strong, and this is most likely what you're going to put on your weapon. Windwalk, however, deserves special mention as it is extremely good on fights where the boss swings slowly but hits like a truck. Chimeron, for example? The 2 are actually pretty close overall, but the Mighty Agility isn't going to be subjected to diminishing returns as quickly as Windwalk will be as we continue getting gear. Just feel free to pick your poison. Gems allow you to strengthen stats that you feel may be a bit lacking. This is usually where the stamina versus agility debate comes to a head. There are 3 general focuses for gemming. A stamina focuser will generally gem agility stamina into red sockets, stamina gems into prismatic and blue sockets, and stamina dodge gems into yellow sockets. An agility focuser will generally gem agility into red and prismatic sockets, agility stamina into blue sockets, and agility dodge into yellow sockets. Someone who's trying to strike a bit of a balance will generally gem agility stamina gems into red, blue, and prismatic sockets, and will usually do agility dodge into yellow sockets. Now, some people will ignore the socket bonuses for certain pieces of gear, while others will always match the sockets. You could probably ignore any haste bonuses without batting an eyelash, but your personal opinions on your stats will be the big decision maker here. I personally compare my stats based on the weightings that Tangedyn uses in his spreadsheet. Regardless of your main gemming strategy, our only real contender for a meta gem is the austere Shadow Spirit Diamond, which increases our armor and gives us some stamina. For magic heavy fights, however, you might consider having an Effulgent Shadow Spirit Diamond in a second helm if you've got one kicking around somewhere. I'm starving. Let's talk about our consumables. The good news is that your food option is pretty easy. You're always going to want agility stamina food in the form of a seafood magnifique feast, skewered eel, or a fortune cookie. Flask will generally be the flask of steel skin if you want stamina, or the flask of winds if you want agility. Keep in mind that if you're using a flask that you've picked up from a cauldron, if you drink it in any form except bear, it's going to give you the agility bonus, but if you drink it in bear form, it's going to give you the stamina bonus. If you truly wish to min-max, you can use the Elixirs of Deep Earth for armor and the Elixirs of Mastery for mastery instead of flasks, but keep in mind that they won't persist through death. For magic heavy fights, you might opt to use a prismatic elixir for increased resistances against magic damage, combined with an elixir of the master. You can choose between potions of the Tol'vir for agility and earthen potions for armor, or, if you're really desperate, you can use mythical healing potions for your health. And don't forget to pre-potion before fights. During those times, the Tol'vir potions for agility are really useful for not only giving you a couple more seconds of possibly dodging, but to increase your threat. I hope that you gained something from this discussion. I didn't scare you off with the whole agility versus stamina thing. If you do have any questions or concerns, please feel free to comment on this video or send me a PM. Also, be sure to check out the links that I've posted in the verbiage below. Until next time, take care.